Prepare to dive into a world where myths intertwine with reality, and ancient tales come alive, whispering their secrets across centuries. Today's narrative will transport you back to distant times, when stories were passed down orally, like gentle echoes in magnificent marble halls. It's time to dim the lights, settle comfortably under a warm blanket, and let the day's noise dissipate, like the morning mist over the azure waters of the Aegean Sea. For these ancient legends remarkably continue to resonate in our hearts. So, as the last glimmers of day fade and the fan creates a soothing background hum, our journey begins into a land where Olympian gods walked freely among mortals, and every tale held a kernel of truth, veiled in wonder. In the picturesque hills of ancient Sicily, where wildflowers scattered across the land like vibrant strokes on an artist's canvas, a young maiden named Persephone spent her days engaged in what seemed, at first glance, a remarkably ordinary task. She was gathering flowers, but not casually, carelessly, as one might pluck a dandelion. No, Persephone moved across these meadows like a gentle breeze, her bare feet barely disturbing the morning dew. She would carefully kneel beside clusters of narcissus, their snow-white petals catching the first rays of the sun, and with meticulous care select only the most perfect specimens. Her woven basket gradually filled with hyacinths, roses, and violets, which seemed to emanate their own inner light. You can almost smell the sweetness in the air, can't you? That subtle blend of honey and fresh grass, the scent of a spring morning, when everything feels new and full of possibility. Persephone's mother, the mighty Demeter, was the goddess of the harvest, and together they bestowed upon the world its blossoms. Their lives were peaceful and predictable, like the unchanging cycle of seasons, comforting, reliable, safe. But on that morning, as Persephone ventured further from her usual paths, something extraordinary caught her eye. A solitary narcissus bloom, larger and incomparably more beautiful than any she had ever seen, grew in a secluded clearing. Its petals seemed to shimmer like pearls, and its fragrance beckoned her forward as powerfully as if someone had called her name. What Persephone didn't know, couldn't know, was that this flower had been placed there deliberately, deep beneath the earth, in caves so profound that sunlight never reached their walls. Hades, lord of the underworld, ruled this realm. He wasn't evil, as he is sometimes portrayed in tales. He was simply lonely. Imagine an eternity spent in a place where nothing grows, nothing changes, nothing lives. The silence there would be deafening, wouldn't it? Hades had seen Persephone during his rare visits to the upper world, watching her tend to her flowers with such delicate care, and something in his ancient heart had stirred. But how could the Lord of the Dead approach the daughter of the harvest? How could he bridge the chasm between life and death, between sunlight and eternal shadow? As Persephone bent down to pluck the magnificent narcissus, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. At first it was just a faint rumble, like distant thunder or a passing chariot. But then the earth tore open with a roar, like the groan of a massive door on ancient hinges, and from the depths flew a chariot drawn by 4 horses as black as night, their eyes gleaming like stars. Hades himself held the reins, his dark cloak billowing behind him. With one swift motion, he swept Persephone into his chariot, and before she could even cry out, they were plummeting back into the earth. The opening closed behind them as if it had never been there. The only traces left behind were Persephone's scattered flowers and her overturned woven basket in the grass. When Demeter discovered her daughter's disappearance, her grief was immeasurable. It's known that sometimes when a person is overwhelmed by deep sorrow, they lose all desire to do anything. They don't want to eat, clean, or engage in ordinary tasks. This is what happened to Demeter, but on such a scale that it affected the entire earth. She stopped caring for the harvest. She stopped sending rains. She stopped coaxing seeds to sprout in the spring. The world began to grow cold and barren. Leaves withered and fell from trees. But no new ones grew. Grass wilted. Flowers died. Even olive trees sacred to the gods began to drop their fruit before it could ripen. Meanwhile, deep within the underworld, something unexpected was happening. Persephone, having overcome her initial shock and fear, began to notice things in her new home that surprised her. The walls of Hades' palace were inlaid with precious gems that caught and reflected light in a way that resembled a scattering of stars. Underground rivers flowed, making their own mesmerizing music, and in gardens where the soil was rich with minerals from the earth's very core, strange, beautiful flowers grew. Hades himself was not the monster she had expected. He spoke softly, almost shyly. He brought her delicacies she had never seen before. Fruits that grew only in the earth's depths were sweet and extraordinary. He showed her the asphodel meadows, where the souls of ordinary mortals wandered in peaceful dreams. He never raised his voice, never demanded anything from her, but simply hoped that she might understand why he had brought her here. Nevertheless, Persephone longed for the sun. She missed her mother. She missed the feel of warm earth beneath her bare feet and the morning songs of birds. No matter how beautiful the underworld was, it wasn't her home. On the surface, the situation was becoming desperate. Without Demeter's care, people began to starve. The other gods pleaded with her to restore the earth's fertility, but she refused. "Return my daughter to me," she said, "and the world will bloom again, but not before." Zeus, king of the gods, finally had to intervene. He sent Hermes, the swift-footed messenger god, to the underworld to negotiate. Hermes found Hades sitting quietly in his garden with Persephone. Neither of them was speaking, simply existing in that strange, timeless state people enter when trying to sort out something complicated. "She must return," Hermes gently told Hades. "The world above is dying." Hades nodded slowly. He knew this moment would come, but then looked at Persephone with eyes that held all the sorrow of the earth's depths. "I understand," he said. "But ask her, has she eaten anything while she was here?" This was a crucial question, for there was an ancient law. Anyone who tasted food in the underworld would be bound to it forever. Persephone's shoulders slumped. That morning, while walking in Hades' garden, she had seen a pomegranate tree laden with fruit. The pomegranates were unlike any she had ever seen, dark red like jewels, each seed gleaming like a tiny ruby. Almost without thinking, she had plucked one and eaten 7 of its seeds. They tasted like concentrated sweetness, like the quintessence of all fruits ever grown. 7 seeds, such a small thing to change the fate of the world. Because of those 7 seeds, Persephone could not return to the upper world permanently. But Hermes, who was cunning with words and negotiations, struck a compromise. For part of each year, 1 month for each seed she had eaten, Persephone would remain with Hades in the underworld. For the remaining months, she would return to her mother and the world of sunlight and growing things. So it was decided. When Persephone returned to the surface, Demeter's joy was so great that flowers instantly bloomed wherever her daughter's feet trod. Spring burst forth like laughter, and summer followed with its abundance of growth and warmth. But when it was time for Persephone to return to the underworld, Demeter's grief brought autumn when leaves changed colour and fell, and winter when the world rested under blankets of snow. It is said that in the underworld, Persephone became a full-fledged queen. She learned to help Hades judge the souls of the dead fairly. She tended the subterranean gardens which bloomed with flowers no living person had ever seen. And gradually she grew fond of this quiet, thoughtful god who had so dramatically altered her life, yet treated her with such gentle respect. When spring returned each year, Persephone emerged from the earth like the flowers themselves, bringing with her the memory of the depths and darkness that made the sunlight even more precious. And Demeter welcomed her daughter home with such joy that the whole world celebrated with blossoming trees, singing birds, and the sweet scent of new grass. Even now, thousands of years later, you can observe this ancient drama playing out in the changing seasons. Every autumn, as the leaves begin to turn, Persephone prepares to return to her underground realm. Every winter, bare branches and dormant seeds await, like Demeter, the return of spring. And when the first crocus pushes through the snow, it is as if Persephone herself is coming home. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other old stories might be hidden in the daily rhythms of the world around us? What stories do the seasons themselves still tell? Speaking of stories hidden in everyday things, have you ever heard someone described as having an Achilles heel? It's an idiom used when a very strong or talented person has one small but critical weakness. The story behind those words begins with a mother's deep love and a desperate attempt to shield her child from a fate she couldn't even imagine. To be continued. Thetis, a revered sea goddess, was a creature of incredible beauty and profound wisdom, her hair cascading like frothing ocean waves, her eyes reflecting the fathomless depths of underwater grottos. When she married the mortal King Peleus and bore a son, her love for this infant was infused with that fierce, all-consuming maternal devotion women have felt throughout the ages. However, as a goddess, Thetis possessed the gift of foresight and could discern glimpses of the future, and what she beheld filled her with trembling dread. Her son, named Achilles, was destined to become the greatest warrior of all time. He would be swift as a squall of wind, mighty as an untamed storm, and incomparably skilled with sword and spear, surpassing any human. Poets would compose odes to his heroic deeds for millennia, but he was fated to perish in the prime of his youth, falling in brutal battle. Imagine Thetis holding her tiny son, feeling his small fingers curl around hers, watching him sleep with that perfect peace unique to infants. How could she accept that this precious child was doomed to such a fleeting and merciless existence? She couldn't. She felt compelled to try and alter his destiny. And so one night, when the entire palace was steeped in silent slumber, and even the night owls held absolute quiet, Thetis carefully wrapped her baby in soft blankets and carried him to the sombre banks of the river Styx. This was no ordinary river. It was the unseen boundary separating the world of the living from the grim realm of the dead, and its waters possessed a unique mystical power. Anyone bathed in the river Styx became utterly invulnerable, shielded from all harm. The river was dark, like a starless midnight, and surprisingly gently warm. Its waters flowed silently, resembling a current of liquid stillness. Thetis waited until the water reached her waist, and then, with a pounding heart and barely a whispered prayer to any gods who might be listening, she immersed her son in the miraculous waters. But here was the peculiarity of holding a child. One must hold them firmly, lest they slip from your grasp. Thetis held Achilles by his heel, her fingers tightly clasping his small, still tender ankle. The waters of the Styx covered every part of the child's body, except for that tiny area where his mother's hand shielded him from the enchanted touch of the river's waters. When she pulled him out, little Achilles was no longer entirely a mortal being. His flesh had acquired the properties of impenetrable armor, ready to deflect any blade or projectile. No sword could pierce his skin, no arrow could strike him, no spear could wound him. Thetis, it seemed to her, had succeeded in her quest to protect her son. Achilles grew up exactly as the ancient prophecies foretold. He was tall and mighty, his golden hair shining in the sun like endless wheat fields in summer's heat. He could outrun racehorses, fight longer than any other warrior, and his skill with weapons was like deadly yet mesmerizing poetry. When he moved across the battlefield, his opponents fled like leaves driven by a furious hurricane. But he was something more, too. He showed kindness to those weaker than him, was fiercely loyal to his comrades, and surprisingly gentle for such a formidable warrior. He played the lyre with skill, composing hymns about the deeds of heroes past. He cared deeply for his companions and unashamedly shed tears when any of them were wounded or killed. In another world, his name might have been immortalized not just for his martial prowess, but for his boundless compassion. When the Trojan War began, a conflict destined to last 10 long years, all the celebrated warriors of Hellas set sail across the wine-dark sea to join the fight. Achilles went with them, leading his contingent of brave soldiers known as the Myrmidons. Their loyalty to him stemmed not only from his undisputed invincibility in battle, but also from the deep respect with which he always treated them, sharing all their hardships and deprivations. For 9 years, Achilles lived up to all expectations, the embodiment of an invulnerable warrior. He engaged in countless battles, always emerging unscathed, while his opponents fell around him like wheat mown by a sharp scythe. His fame grew until the mere mention of his name caused entire enemy armies to waver deeply. But then an event occurred that revealed another facet of Achilles' essence, a side capable of the deepest emotions. His truest friend, Patroclus, fell in battle at the hands of Hector, Troy's most outstanding warrior. Patroclus was not merely a friend to him. He was like a brother, one who penetrated to the very core of Achilles' heart, hidden beneath the cloak of his invulnerable flesh. Achilles' grief descended upon him like a destructive natural disaster. His sobs were so loud that his mother, dwelling in her underwater palace, heard them. He refused food and sleep. He cut off his magnificent golden hair and threw it onto Patroclus's funeral pyre. Then, driven by a rage that was, at its core, a distorted form of love, he sought out Hector and challenged him to a deadly duel. The battle between Achilles and Hector was like a grand clash between an untamed storm and an unyielding mountain. Both opponents possessed incomparable skill. Both were undeniably brave, but only one was protected by the magical waters of the Styx. Hector fought with incredible courage, but ultimately Achilles' spear found its mark, and Troy's greatest defender fell. Achilles' subsequent actions revealed both his human heart and the depth of his terrible grief. Instead of showing Hector's body the respect due to a worthy opponent, he tied it to his war chariot and dragged it around the mighty walls of Troy. This was an act of horrific desecration that shocked both armies and angered the gods themselves. For several days Achilles persisted in this grim ritual, driving his chariot around the walls of Troy, while Hector's family watched with unfeigned horror from the city's towers. It seemed that by subjecting Hector's body to such cruel punishment, he was somehow trying to avenge death itself for taking his friend. But in the end, Hector's father, the venerable King Priam, performed an act that required courage, surpassing any valor on the battlefield. He appeared at Achilles' tent deep in the night, completely unarmed and without any guard, to plead for the return of his son's body. The elderly king knelt before the warrior who had taken his child's life, speaking to him not as a ruler to an enemy, but as a father to another man, capable of understanding the depth of loss. "I have done what no mortal has dared," Priam said softly. "I have kissed the hands of the man who killed my son." Something in those words pierced through Achilles' veil of rage and grief, reaching the deepest parts of his heart. He looked at this elderly, grief-stricken man, and in his form, he saw his own father, who would one day have to mourn him with the same unbearable pain. In that moment he wept, but these were not angry tears of fury, but cleansing tears of shared human sorrow. He returned Hector's body to Priam and declared a temporary truce, so that Troy could properly mourn its hero. This episode became one of the most sublime moments in Achilles' life, demonstrating that even the greatest of warriors ultimately remained just a man, capable of being moved by compassion. But the war continued, and relentless fate had not forgotten its decree for Achilles. During the last fierce battles at the walls of Troy, as he fought with his characteristic unparalleled skill and absolute fearlessness, an arrow flew towards him. It was shot by Paris, Hector's brother, more renowned for his physical beauty than his martial prowess. Typically, such an arrow would have harmlessly bounced off Achilles' protected skin. However, this arrow, guided by the will of the god Apollo himself, found the single vulnerable spot on Achilles' entire body, his heel, the very place where his mother's fingers had shielded him from the touch of the Styx's waters. It was such a minuscule target, such an improbable wound, yet it was enough. The greatest warrior who ever lived fell from a wound to his heel, the only part of his body where his mother's protective touch had preserved his mortality. In her desire to save her son from his destined fate, Thetis had unwittingly created the very vulnerability that would later destroy him. As Achilles drew his last breath, his thoughts were not of countless victories or eternal glory, but of simple earthly things, of the feel of warm sunlight on his face, of the ringing laughter of his loyal friend Patroclus, of unfinished songs that would never be completed. He thought of his mother, hoping she would understand that he had striven to live a life that honored the gift of being she had given him, even if he couldn't prolong it as long as she wished. The tale of Achilles serves as a reminder that our greatest strengths and our deepest vulnerabilities often spring from the same source, from the love of those who care for us. Every protection has its limits. Every gift carries its price. And sometimes what empowers us also makes us vulnerable. Even today, when we utter the phrase Achilles' heel, we are revisiting this age-old truth. Everyone, no matter how powerful they seem, has that small, hidden place where the arrows of relentless fate can strike. Perhaps it is not a weakness at all, but simply an inherent part of what makes us human. The arrows of fate that struck Achilles were not the only ones that forever altered the course of history. Sometimes love itself can turn out to be the most perilous of all arrows. As a young musician named Orpheus was destined to discover on what should have been the happiest day of his life. Orpheus was blessed with a gift that far surpassed ordinary talent. When he drew sounds from his lyre and sang, flowers bloomed out of season. Rivers altered their courses to flow closer to his wondrous melodies. Wild beasts gathered together and sat peacefully side by side. Lions rested alongside lambs and hawks beside mice. All listened with the same dreamy serenity one might feel, listening to someone hum their favorite lullaby. Even mighty trees tore their roots from the earth and drew near to heed his playing. Imagine walking through a forest where ancient oaks slowly shift, like colossal yet gentle giants, their leaves rustling in time with a distant melody. Such was the indescribable power of Orpheus's music. It transformed the impossible into the natural, and the magical into the mundane. When Orpheus fell deeply in love with Eurydice, a wood nymph whose eyes resembled the purest spring water and whose laughter chimed like bells caught by the wind, his musical artistry seemed to reach new heights. The melodies born from his fingers now reflected the play of sunlight in her dark tresses. The rhythms of his songs harmonized with her graceful movements across sun-drenched meadows, and the harmonies embodied the boundless wonder he felt simply watching her as she tended to injured birds or gathered wild honey. Their wedding was flawless, so much so that it inspired the conviction that the world was, at its core, inherently benevolent. The celebration itself took place in a grove where wildflowers formed natural circles, as if nature itself had joined the festivities. Orpheus performed a composition he had written especially for this momentous day, and as his voice stirred the air, butterflies fluttered around the newlyweds, like living confetti. After the ceremony, as the sun dipped towards the horizon and the celebration gave way to that blissful weariness that follows a perfect day, Eurydice decided to walk through the meadow. She desired a few moments of solitude to savor the bliss, to allow it to settle in her heart like honey soaking into warm bread. She walked barefoot through the grass, still adorned with a wedding wreath of wild roses, when she felt something stir beneath her foot. A serpent, disturbed from its evening rest, bit her ankle with venomous fangs. Eurydice had time only to whisper Orpheus's name before she collapsed lifelessly among the flowers that, moments before, had witnessed her jubilation. By the time Orpheus finally reached her, she had already departed this world. Her hand still held warmth in his, her face remained serene, but everything that made her Eurydice, her ringing laughter, her gentle teasing, her habit of humming along to his playing, all of it had melted away like pre-dawn mist. For 7 days and 7 nights Orpheus stayed by Eurydice's side, pouring out laments so profoundly piercing that even soulless stones wept. His music had always held power over the natural world, but now it served as a conduit for pain, so pure and all-encompassing that it seemed to pierce the very fabric of existence. Others, sympathetic, urged him to eat, to sleep, to distract himself from his sorrow for a while, to consider his own well-being. But Orpheus was unable. How could one eat when the person who gave meaning to his existence was gone? How could one sleep when dreams were filled with music he could never again share with anyone? Finally, a thought struck him. It was an idea so desperate and perilous that only one consumed by inconsolable grief would attempt to bring it to fruition. He would undertake a journey to the underworld itself and persuade Hades to return Eurydice. No mortal had ever before managed to enter the realm of shadows and return. However, Orpheus had his music, and his art had always possessed the ability to accomplish the unthinkable. The entrance to the underworld lay hidden in a cave so bottomless that the sun's rays never reached its furthest confines. As Orpheus descended into this abyss, playing his lyre to light the way, the usual noises of the underworld gradually hushed. The agonizing cries of cursed souls, the roar of the river Styx's waters, the creak of colossal gates, all fell silent, listening to his song. Even Cerberus, the three-headed guardian who protected the entrance to the world of the dead, lay down and let out a soft whine as Orpheus played. The monster's 3 pairs of eyes, which usually blazed with unceasing vigilance, closed like the eyelids of a sleeping puppy. When Orpheus finally stood before the thrones of Hades and Persephone, he performed the most poignant melody of his life. He sang of love that triumphs over death, of the agony of separation, of a world stripped of its harmony when Eurydice was taken from him. His song was so beautiful, so imbued with such genuine sorrow and deep attachment, that for the first time in long eons, Hades wept. Even the Erinyes, those fearsome goddesses of retribution, whose hearts were said to be harder than flint, felt their cheeks moisten with tears they couldn't recall ever shedding before. Persephone, who understood more deeply than anyone what it meant to be torn from the upper world, leaned over and whispered something in her husband's ear. Hades slowly bowed his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, like any mortal overcome by emotion. "Your music has touched our souls," Hades said, his voice soft, with an unaccustomed note of compassion. "We will return Eurydice to you, but there is one absolute condition. You must leave the realm of shadows, walking ahead of her, and you must not look back until you both have stepped into the light of the upper world. If you turn to glimpse her even once before that moment, she will be lost to you forever." This condition seemed perfectly manageable to Orpheus. He had already found his way into the underworld. Surely he could find his way back out. He readily bowed his head, already visualizing the moment he and Eurydice would emerge into daylight and resume their shared destiny. The return journey was marked by joy. Behind him, Orpheus distinctly discerned Eurydice's familiar footsteps, a faint breath, the rustle of her bridal gown against the stone archways. Sometimes she softly hummed the melodies he played to light their way, and that sound surpassed any music he had ever heard. However, as they ascended, and the path grew more winding and steep, uncertainty began to creep into Orpheus's mind. The footsteps behind him seemed barely perceptible. What if he was only imagining them? What if Hades had misled him, and he was ascending alone while Eurydice remained a captive in the depths. What if she was desperately trying to keep up, faltering, slowing down? The closer they got to the surface, the more these fears assailed him. He began to move more slowly, straining to listen for the slightest sign of her presence. Once, when a section of the path was particularly treacherous, he heard her stumble slightly, and he had to clench his lyre tightly to keep from turning to offer her help. Finally, after what seemed like endless hours of ascent, Orpheus saw something that made his heart pound with exhilaration. Ahead, a thin thread of sunlight appeared, indicating the cave's exit. They were almost free. Just a few more steps, and they would both reclaim the world of the living. But as he approached this sliver of light, his tormenting doubts reached their peak. The footsteps behind him had grown so faint that he could barely distinguish them. What if Eurydice was still trapped in the gloomy realm behind them? What if she needed his support to cross the final threshold? The moment his feet touched the sunlight, just one step away from Eurydice's salvation, Orpheus turned. For one magnificent, soul-shattering instant, he saw her. She was there, as beautiful as ever, reaching out towards the light and towards him. But she was still one step inside the boundary of the underworld, and by looking back, Orpheus had violated the condition of her return. "Farewell, my only one," Eurydice whispered, and her voice was filled with sorrow, but devoid of anger. She understood that he had turned back out of immense love for her, not out of disbelief. But understanding could not change the fatal consequences. She melted away like pre-dawn mist, and this time there was no body to mourn, no grave to visit. She simply dissolved, returning to the realm of the dead, and the path behind Orpheus closed up, like water closing over a dropped stone. Orpheus lived out his remaining years, creating melodies of love and loss, of the chasm that lies between hope and despair. His music became even more sublime than before, but also deeper in its sorrow, carrying the realization that some mistakes cannot be undone, and some chances cannot be recreated. He no longer attempted to return to the underworld. Perhaps he knew that Hades' favor was not granted twice, or perhaps he understood that some sorrows must simply be accepted, transformed into something else through the alchemy of time and humility. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice serves as a reminder. Love sometimes demands unimaginable acts from us, such as moving forward without looking back, relying on what is hidden from view, believing in promises that seem too wondrous to be true. And sometimes, even when we fail in these impossible tasks, the striving itself becomes a kind of melody that echoes through the cosmos long after we are gone. Sometimes the echoes of ancient tales reach our modern day in the most unpredictable ways. Just as Orpheus's music lived on after him, so too does the whisper of a magnificent city that, according to legend, sank beneath the waves long before the age of written history. The philosopher Plato first recounted the legend of Atlantis in his philosophical treatises, portraying it as a dwelling that flourished 9,000 years before his era. Whether this was historical fact or a philosophical reflection on the rise and fall of civilizations may forever remain a mystery. However, the story he told was so vivid, so rich in detail, that humanity has tirelessly searched for Atlantis ever since. According to Plato, Atlantis was located on an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules. in the area now known as the Strait of Gibraltar. This island surpassed the combined size of Libya and Asia. It had a unique structure of concentric circles, alternating between rings of land and channels of water, like a giant target fashioned from earth and sea. At the very heart of these rings rose the most magnificent city imaginable. Its structures were built from black, white, and red mineral quarried directly on the island, and many were faced with brass, tin, and a mysterious metal called orichalcum, which radiated a warm, golden glow. At the heart of the magnificent city stood a palace, a true embodiment of engineering genius and artistic splendor. Its walls, as if clad in shimmering armor, were adorned with the purest silver, and its soaring spires sparkled under the sun, covered in brilliant gold. Within this architectural masterpiece lay the sacred temple of Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, whom ancient legends named as the progenitor of Atlantis's first monarch. The temple's facade was entirely draped in silver, except for its skyward-reaching spires, which gleamed dazzlingly gold. The interior housed a colossal statue of Poseidon himself, majestically driving 6 winged horses. This sculpture was so grand that its head nearly touched the ceilings of the immense chamber. However, perhaps it was not so much the metropolis's external beauty that captured the imagination as its astonishing sophistication and advancement. The Atlanteans developed an ingenious and multi-layered system for utilizing thermal and cold springs, ensuring an uninterrupted water supply for their exquisite bath complexes. They built extensive harbors capable of receiving sea-going vessels arriving from the most distant corners of the then civilized world. Their agricultural practices reached such perfection that the island's fertile land yielded 2 abundant harvests annually. The Atlanteans themselves were considered direct descendants of the Sea Lord, Poseidon, and for many centuries echoes of this divine essence lingered within them. They were distinguished by extraordinary wisdom, unwavering justice, and modesty in their earthly aspirations. For them, virtue stood incomparably above material wealth, and profound wisdom was valued far more than the pursuit of boundless power. The laws of their state were carved onto majestic pillars of orichalcum, a rare and precious metal, and their kings gathered alternately every 5 and 6 years to exchange views on crucial state matters and to scrupulously ensure the triumph of justice throughout their vast domain. For countless generations, Atlantis flourished, relying on this well-conceived and effective system of governance and values. Their swift ships plied the boundless oceans, reaching the most distant corners of the earth, bringing home valuable knowledge and exotic goods, and generously sharing their own innovative inventions and achievements with other peoples. The Atlanteans possessed exceptional mastery in scientific fields that other civilizations of the time could not even conceive of. They deeply understood the laws of celestial motion, the subtleties of various metals' properties, and the secrets of cultivating plants capable of surviving and yielding harvests in conditions that other peoples would have deemed utterly unsuitable for life.